So I got this request to respond to another Secular Talk video. This is one where Kyle Kalinske applauds Bernie's boner for Denmark. And the last time I responded to a Secular Talk video, it was over 20 minutes, and I want to keep this short, so I'm not going to play the clips this time. I'm just going to respond to a few of the points that Kalinske makes, but his video is linked down below for anyone that wants to watch. But I want to begin by quoting Bosch Fawston. America was born to tell the rest of the world to go to hell. And I say to Bernie Sanders, take your apples to oranges comparisons and go to hell. And this is the case whenever you compare two countries, because there are always many differences. For instance, ideally, I'm for open borders and immigration. But do I think a country like Israel should have open borders?
Wait. Oh, hell no.
It's also interesting to note that Bernie Sanders shamed Ted Cruz for comparing socialist countries like Denmark to communist countries like the Soviet Union and Cuba, even though the president of Denmark told Bernie Sanders to stop calling Denmark socialist. And that's a distinction I want to make right away too. The Scandinavian countries are market economies with socialist programs. I'm sure that even Kyle Kalinske would admit that the Scandinavian countries are mixed economies. Anyway, Kalinske addresses a point in the debate where someone from Denmark asks Bernie about the high taxes, but this immediately shifted to healthcare and other social programs. Bernie likes to say that Denmark has socialized medicine, so if we just copy and paste what they're doing in Denmark over here in the United States, everything will work out just fine. This doesn't factor in that Denmark is much smaller in size and population, the fact that Denmark is culturally different in many ways. Denmark also has freer markets in some aspects and industries, which may help balance out the generous welfare state with the economy. Denmark for a while was ranked higher than the United States on the Economic Freedom Index, although today they're about neck and neck. But again, Denmark ranks higher in business freedom than the United States. This is a thing in Canada too. Sure, Canada does have socialized medicine, but Canada's financial industry is much less regulated than the United States and is thus more stable as a result. But do I see Bernie Sanders calling for less regulation and freer markets?
No, of course not.
Denmark also does not spend as much on military as the United States, and I can go on all day about this point, but most notably, Denmark pays an ungodly amount of taxes. And that's what the question was supposed to be about. Would you be willing to tax Americans as much as Denmark taxes its citizens? This is something that Michael Booth talks about in his book, The Almost Nearly Perfect People. Michael Booth spent many years living in Denmark, and according to numerous sources, goods and services cost significantly more in Denmark because of value-added taxes and other taxes. 25% value-added tax? Imagine how excited you get whenever you see something that's on sale for 25% off. Well, in Denmark, it's the exact opposite, but with every good and service. The cost of owning a home in Denmark is 70% higher than for the average European. Gasoline costs around $6 a gallon. There is a lot of commotion about the 180% tax on cars, which for a while doubled the cost of cars in comparison to the United States, but apparently Denmark is lowering this tax significantly, so good news for Denmark. For a while, Denmark had a fat tax to help encourage healthier eating, which ended up failing, but I did mention this on a recent video that if we ever get socialized medicine in America, that healthy foods will become regulated or taxed out of existence. Now, people often defend Denmark, saying that they have higher incomes because of strong unions, but what good is a $20 an hour job when half your check gets siphoned and everything costs 25% more? Even in Sweden, a country that's also applauded by Bernie Sanders because of its tuition-free college, students often graduate with student loan debt because the cost of living is so high. At least in America, when you're finished paying your student loans, you're done paying for college education. But in places like Denmark, you'll pay taxes to fund college education until you die. And this is important to note. Sure, as Bernie Sanders likes to say, you pay higher taxes, but you get all these goodies and freebies on the other end, like healthcare, tuition-free college, and free childcare. Well, what happens if I choose not to have kids? I don't have kids in America and I pay less than $2,500 a year for health insurance, whereas healthcare costs around $5,000 per head in Denmark. I also won't be reaping any of the benefits like free childcare or maternity leave, so why should I have to pay for it? What if I decide I don't want to go to college? Guess what? I'm still on the hook for tuition because I don't have a choice to not pay taxes. And this is a point that needs to be made because this is where Ted Cruz failed. America is all about individualism and making something of your own life. It's all about pursuing your own happiness. The government doesn't have a right to force you to pay for other people's education or pay for other people's healthcare or finance daycare for kids that aren't yours. Taking care of kids that aren't yours. You know what that means. Cut. The bottom line is, I want to decide what to do with my money. As Booth says in his book, in Denmark, you only have control over 1/3 of your money. You work for the government until Thursday morning. But hey, don't complain about it because after all, X-rays are on the house in Denmark. Does any of this sound familiar? What's wrong? You don't like taxes? Well, do you like driving on any of the roads? The point is, you don't have a right to force other people to pay for your health care or your tuition or your kids' daycare. What if I choose not to buy health insurance? What if I make a calculated risk to go without health insurance for a couple years so that I can start a business or go to school? What if I invent a medicine or a treatment? Do I get to sell it on the open market for a price that I desire? Or does the government get to nationalize my invention because, after all, people have a right to healthcare? Socialized medicine requires theft, slavery, or a combination of the two. And people like Bernie Sanders and Kyle Kulinski are fine with legalizing theft and slavery because to them, the ends justify the means. It's akin to saying that it's okay to steal food from your local grocery store so long as you're close to starving to death. Anyway, there is a lot to say about the healthcare industry in America. I recommend checking out Roosevelt Care by Don Watkins and checking out Rituparna Basu's lectures, which are linked down below. But consider the fact that capitalism always leads to innovation, superior products and services, and cheaper products and services, while socialism leads to scarcity, famine, poverty, stagnating technology. Why would anyone want to apply the latter to an important industry like healthcare? You've got to be out of your goddamn mind. Would you rather your hospitals and clinics look like the Apple Store or the DMV? Oh, he's just fear-mongering. These motherfuckers fear-monger all the time. Oh, millions will die if you repeal Obamacare. Also, it's important to note that while America has the freest market in healthcare, it's by far from free market given many intense regulations that date back to World War II, along with Medicare and Medicaid, and now Obamacare, not to mention whatever regulations exist at the state level. It's like calling Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz a giant because she's bigger than all of the munchkins in Munchkinland. But nonetheless, most of the medical innovation does come from the United States. Even left-leaning sources like the New York Times and Huffington Post admit this fact. And healthcare would become better and more affordable if we privatized it more. Kulinski goes on to complain about military spending, setting up this false dichotomy, saying that we don't need to raise taxes in America, we could just cut the military in half and allocate the saved tax dollars to healthcare. First off, military is a proper function of government. Providing health care is not a proper function of government. Providing health insurance is not a proper function of government. Wealth redistribution is not a proper function of government. Secondly, if you're going to cut military spending, then why not return the tax dollars to the American people? Is that an option? By the way, cutting the military in half would save about $300 billion, which would mean only about $1,000 a head in healthcare per year. Not sure if that would be enough, but definitely puts things in perspective. Kyle Kulinski also advocates for cutting corporate welfare for reallocation, but he uses it to smear Ted Cruz, even though Ted Cruz advocated against corporate welfare in the debate. But hey, I agree. No more subsidies to green technology to fight climate change. No more bailouts for car companies to save union jobs. No more subsidies for colleges and universities. And Kulinski concludes his video by saying that government is so corrupt that it's an oligarchy. And I agree, there is a lot of corruption in Washington, which begs a huge question for me. If the government is so corrupt, then why in the blue hell would you want them in charge of healthcare?